Marley was dead. To begin with, there is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. And so begins my favourite book, and, amazingly, and luckily as well, Rhonda's favourite story, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So we thought, at this festive time of the year, because this is the December 2024 podcast, and it is also the end of the first season that we have run as well. We began in January. We are going to join the ghosts of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas yet to come, and fly with them on a little exploration of the story of Scrooge and A Christmas Carol, and look at the life of Charles Dickens, the writer, as well. And what better way to do that than to join hands with the spirits, fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and drop in on someone who, let's say, knows a thing or two about the book and about Charles Dickens. In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. Well, absolutely, utterly delighted this time, this festive season, to be joined by an old acquaintance, old friend, I would like to say.
I would say.
So welcome very much. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, yes. My name is Gerald Dickens, and I'm very fortunate to have a middle name, Charles, which might give it away slightly. I'm a great-great-grandson of Charles Dickens, the wonderful author, and the man who's made this season what it is, with the creation of his ghostly little book in 1843, A Christmas Carol.
Yeah. Now, isn't that cool, folks?
Especially for us, because A Christmas Carol is both of our favorite story of all time.
I've read it every Christmas for years. And now I read it aloud to Rhonda every Christmas.
It does.
We finish on Christmas Eve.
We start 5 nights before Christmas Eve.
Yeah. So obviously this was a story that you were brought up with as well. I mean, how significant was it in the Dickens household?
Well, that's an interesting point, actually, because in childhood, we were always aware that I'm the youngest of 4 children. We were always aware that we were related to this figure, this name, this celebrity. My father was a huge Charles Dickens fan and scholar, and was always writing articles and giving speeches and doing research. So we were always surrounded by it. But it's very interesting. He never forced it on us, so I never remember it being a sort of weight or a great expectation, if I might borrow another title. It was just always there. My first memory of it was, I must have been 5 or 6 years old, probably. And our cousins and uncle and aunt had come to stay with us for Christmas. And we all sat up in a bedroom upstairs, and my uncle read A Christmas Carol to us. And I'll never forget getting to the end of the story and being just absolutely amazed that Scrooge hadn't missed Christmas Day, that it had all happened in one night. And looking back on it, it makes me realized what a fantastic A, storyteller, but B, amateur conjurer and magician Charles Dickens was, because he'd led us down one path. He'd told us to believe something, and then with a sleight of hand, he told us the complete opposite. Yeah. And I remember being absolutely fascinated by that and loving the mystery of it. So that was my first memory of it. I'll never forget it.
My first memory was, well, I was always aware of the story. And we all knew about Scrooge. But I remember the one that really stuck in my mind was there was a short animation in the early 70s of A Christmas Carol, which is just like half an hour long.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It had Ralph Richardson, I think it was.
Oh, yes, it did. I've seen that.
And the voice of Scrooge was Alistair Sim. So a much older Alistair Sim than in the movie. And although it was condensed into half an hour, I was just absolutely blown away by it. I was hooked from that moment.
Yeah.
And have been ever since. And no story has affected me quite as much as that, when you keep going back to it. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
You mentioned it, you read it every year, and you can keep going back to it, and you discover new things every single time you read it. I've lived with this story professionally for 31 years, and it never gets mundane. It never gets work-like. It never gets run-of-the-mill. It's always exciting. And every single season, I discover something new in it. A new way of phrasing something, a new possibility as to why something happens. And considering he wrote it in 6 weeks flat, it's extraordinary that there's that amount of depth in the story.
And he was about, 30 years old when he wrote it?
Yeah.
Those teeth.
I was always wondering, too, what is it about the story that makes it so, it's almost mythic, it's almost archetypal, like there's something to it that everybody connects with somehow.
It has a bit of everything, I think. At its heart, it was a very, and it's quite difficult to remember this now, but at its heart, it was a biting indictment of the social conditions of Britain at that time. It is fantasy. It has larger-than-life characters with incredible names. I mean, you just can't help smiling at them. It changes its ability to move you either in a very positive, happy, excited way or a very negative, depressing or tragic way within a turn of a sentence, within a page. 1 minute you're laughing, the next minute you have tears in your eyes. So on every single level, it captures something. It brings you in. And it's so fast-paced when Scrooge is traveling and flying and seeing all these scenes. You haven't really got time to get yourself over one incident when you're into the next. So it just pulls you in and through. It's incredible how it does that. It's wonderful how it captures.
Yeah, it really truly is an amazing story.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, so uplifting as well, because you start off and you don't like Scrooge. It's impossible to like this man. But you end up at the end liking him and being glad that he had been saved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it goes around him.
It's a very interesting thing that Charles Dickens does with the character of Scrooge in the first part of the book. So he based the plot on something he'd written before. In the Pickwick Papers, one of the characters tells a short story at Christmas, and it's called The Tale of the Goblin Who Stole a Sexton. And basically it's the same plot of A Christmas Carol. This evil gravedigger called Gabriel Grubb hates Christmas, hates the celebration of Christmas. He loves the fact that he's busy digging a grave on Christmas Eve because it means someone is in utter misery at this time of year when, in his mind, there's this false celebration. He whacks a carol singer around the head with his spade. He lies on the grave and drinks gin. And, Gabriel Grubb, there is nothing to like about him at all. He's violent. He's unredeemable. However, during that night, he's pulled into an underground cabin by a strange supernatural goblin who shows him lots of scenes of life, of poverty, of the ability to make the best of everything. And then when he wakes up the next morning, still on the grave, covered with frost, he walks away into a new life, moved. Now, with A Christmas Carol, when Dickens came back to it a few years later, he doesn't make Scrooge an utterly unpleasant character. He gives him qualities. He gives him good qualities. He's mean. But he's not violent. That's the thing. He's not in any way criminal. When he first talks to the charity collector, he says, look, I pay my taxes for the prisons and the workhouses. Why should I be paying any more to you? No, I do all that. I'm a rich businessman. I pay taxes. It's not my fault that the system's got it wrong. That, I think, is a really interesting little moment, because it tells us all we need to know about Scrooge. He is a legitimate businessman. Dickens also tells us where his business is, right in the heart of the city of London, right in the very middle of the financial district of London. So he's not some backstreet criminal moneylender. He is a proper businessman. And we're shown his associates, his business associates, and they're all respectable, and they have beautiful jewelry and watches and are very fine gentlemen. So Dickens goes out of his way to tell us that actually Scrooge is a legitimate, decent man. He's just utterly mean and won't share anything. When Bob Cratchit asks for Christmas Eve, for Christmas Day off, Scrooge says, well, don't you realize how much you're damaging my business? But all right, I suppose you must have it, he says. He kind of gives in.
That's true.
And then when Scrooge is shown with the Ghost of Christmas Past, the first vision that he's shown is of himself at school, lonely. All the other children have gone home to their own homes and are having a wonderful celebration, which Scrooge has seen. But he is in school, left alone, abandoned by his family. And the first thing he thinks of is the little boy that came to sing carols at his door earlier, who he'd sent packing. It's that early in the story that we begin to see Scrooge melting. Mm-hmm. He compares himself as a child with that child, and suddenly things start working. And I think that's a really interesting thing that Dickens does. He can't be villainous and unpleasant and completely unlikable from the start. Otherwise, the story doesn't work. There has to be a grain of something in there for the story to work.
How much of Charles Dickens do you think is in the characters within it? I mean, I'm not.
So I think it's another very clever thing.
Was mean. I'm just saying that he.
No.
But he may have reflected on his own childhood of being.
He may well have done. On a more overall answer to that question, how much of you is in Scrooge, and how much of me is in Scrooge, and how much of you is in Bob Cratchit, and how much of me is in Bob Cratchit, and the charity collector, and it's a real everyman story in that we can identify ourselves in all of the characters, which is also incredibly important. We all have that time coming up to Christmas where there's too much commercialism, there's too much going on, and if you get bombarded by one more, well, spam email nowadays, but whatever it might have been, you just go absolutely crazy. That's the Scrooge in us. But we want to be valued, we want to be looked after. So Dickens's own childhood, well, he had certainly a very difficult childhood. Of course he did. His father was imprisoned for debt, so was absent, as is Scrooge's father, for different reasons, but absent father at that time. Mm-hmm. Dickens was sent to work in a rat-infested, squalid factory by the Thames in London, purely to raise the money to clear the debt, to release his parents from the debtor's prison where they were incarcerated. He was living on his own. He was aged 12 at this time. He was living on his own in London, in lodgings somewhere. and would walk about the streets at night, just looking at destitution and poverty and everything that the streets of London showed him. So yes, he would have channeled that. Of course he would have done. This lonely child, abandoned, just on his own at this time of year. So yes, I'm sure he must have felt very much himself when he was writing that scene.
What a weight must have been on such young shoulders, though, having to pay back a debt, for his father's debts.
And he was utterly humiliated by it. He didn't tell his family what had happened. He never told them throughout his entire life. They only discovered it after he died, when the John Forster biography of his life was published shortly after Dickens died. That was the first they knew about this. Now, he had told them because he'd written David Copperfield, in which he told it all. He laid it all out, but nobody realized it was autobiographical at the time. They just thought it was a wonderful bit of storytelling. But that was Dickens's childhood. And again, as we're talking about Christmas Carol, you do see it in his other works. You see references to abandonment and loneliness, and especially this child figure, which pops up again and again in Copperfield, in Great Expectations, in Oliver Twist, in many of the others. There's a child protagonist who, for some reason, is abandoned and alone.
In the schoolroom scene, he's imagining all these characters from the books. Oh. They're assuaging his loneliness a little bit. I wonder if that actually was part of his experience as well.
I'm sure. We know he loved to read. He adored adventure stories. I think Robinson Crusoe that he mentions in that passage was one of his favorites. So yes, you can just imagine him sitting alone and his world coming alive with all these beautiful characters coming to vivid life. He talks about the colors of the parrot in that sequence, and it's vivid and it's bright, where everything so far has been dark and monochrome and foggy and snowy, and then suddenly there's this splash of color that leaps off the page. I'm sure that was his experience.
He refers to Alibaba in it as well.
Yes, that's right.
There's all these sort of wonderful tales which made life bearable.
Yeah, absolutely.
He must have felt a real sense of unfairness, though. I mean, his father is locked up for debt, but then he's put in a prison where they charge him for his meals and accommodation, basically, for being banged up. So your debt is going to just increase more and more, and you're locked up, so you can't do anything to earn money to pay it back. So
it's like a student loan, doesn't it?
Just so. But that sort of feeling of unfairness as well is something that really comes through in his work.
Yeah. And at the same time, and this ties back to Christmas Carol as well, his sister was on a scholarship at the Royal Academy of Music.
All right. I heard that song.
Yeah, and she was being feted, and he was taken to watch her being presented with a prize or an award. And he admitted later that really affected him. He did feel jealous of her, but felt jealous of the situation, didn't feel jealous of her. They never had any problem about it. They never fell out about it. But that was an extraordinary sort of unfairness in his world as well, that here was he in the blacking factory, and there was she at the Royal Academy of Music being presented with prizes and awards. And her name, of course, was Fan. Which is the name of the sister in A Christmas Carol.
Oh, wow.
There's little Scrooge by himself at school, and who should run in but his sister Fan, who says, "I've come to take you home. I've come to rescue you."
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is. He must have been really sort of marked out for being bullied, though, in that blacking factory, because of the fact that he would have been seen as having like a posh voice.
I wonder.
Compared to the working class people there.
I wonder.
Maybe not a posh voice if you were a lord, but to somebody on the lowest rung on the ladder,
Yeah.
He must have
that one I don't know. not aware of it. He certainly made a friend in the blacking factory.
Right.
Another interesting connection. A young lad called Bob, and they worked together very hard. Against the grain, just putting their best into it, whatever might have been happening around it, they tried their best. So, and he did later name a character after his good friend Bob. You might expect it's Bob Cratchit. Actually not, because this young lad's name was Bob Fagin. So in honor of their friendship, he creates one of the biggest master villains of literature and he gives him that name, which I'm not sure how that went down. But yeah, he certainly got close to Bob. And I think they would walk home together from the factory, and young Dickens would invent a different address to sort of say, this is where I live, so I'll see you tomorrow, because he didn't want his friend to see the reality of the squalor of where he was living in lodgings.
Wow.
I don't know what Bob Fagin's the circumstances were. I don't know where he lived. Maybe they were both doing the same.
Yeah.
Sort of parting at a respectable point of town and then going back off to their lodgings. I don't know, but yeah.
This reminds me of the movie that I think we just discovered it last Christmas, was it? The Man Who Invented Christmas. We just kind of saw it on TV and thought we would tune in rather skeptically, not expecting to like it, but we actually thought, oh, this is actually really good.
I think it's lovely. I think it's a lovely celebration of Dickens and Christmas. I think he captures Dickens very well. This energy, this nervousness that all these writing powers were deserting him. That he'd had a couple of, I think they rather oversell it in the movie. They suggest he's had 3 flops on the trot. Well, it wasn't quite true. It's just the sales weren't as good as he'd become used to with Pickwick Papers and Nicholas Nickleby and Oliver Twist. But anyway, but everything that happens in that movie is true. It didn't all happen in the same 3 weeks or however long the movie takes, 6 weeks, I suppose, because it's the writing of A Christmas Carol. But didn't all happen in that one winter, but it all happened. There's a scene that shows John Dickens, his father, cutting autographs off the bottom of letters to sell. Well, that was true. John Dickens did do that. So this is selling Charles Dickens merch, here's a genuine autograph. John did do that to make a little extra cash, which is extraordinary. And I think it's no coincidence that they made John Dickens the father very much in the image of the Charles Dickens we know, with the long flowing hair and the beard and the sparkling eyes and doing puppet shows and magic tricks and all of those things. They very much put Charles into John. Yeah.
Jonathan.
I thought it was a great movie. I enjoyed it. I watched it just a week ago, actually, when I was flying. I can't remember. This is my 3rd trip to America in a couple of months, but either flying to or flying back on one of the trips, The Man Who Invented Christmas was on. So I thought, yeah, I'll give that another look. It was great. I enjoyed it.
I thought it was really, really fun, fantastic. I really liked it.
Yeah.
But and I mean, there have been so many versions of it, obviously. But the one thing, just going back to the sort of childhood thing, is the amount of descriptions about food and drink that there is in A Christmas Carol. Do you think that kind of came from a period as well when he maybe didn't have enough to eat? And
I would imagine. I would imagine that's the case. And not just in A Christmas Carol as well. I mean, all the way through. You read Pickwick. Good grief. If you ate that amount, you'd be heaven knows what size. But yes, there's always food, and food is always associated with celebration and togetherness and fellowship. Whether it's a big banquet or comes back down to the Cratchits' Christmas lunch with the meager goose.
I'm just thinking of
there's always these descriptions and loving descriptions of drink as well. Again, in Bob Cratchit's scene, he mixes a lemon punch and gives it to all the family as they have it. I did an event a couple of years ago now, with a historian who specialized in drinks, the history of drinks. And he recreated that lemon punch that Bob Cratchit makes. It was beautiful. Oh, my word. So it's all made up with lemon and some spices, a bit of ginger, a bit of nutmeg, something like that, which presumably would have been left over from making the Christmas pudding. So it's all there. Slice of lemon peel. It's all mixed up. And then he took a red hot poker that he'd heated and just plunged it into the drink. So it instantly warmed. So you wouldn't have to waste the coals on the fire by gently heating this for a long time, because you're already doing that with the pudding or whatever else you're cooking. So you just plunge this red hot poker into the drink. It fizzed. That was real theatre. It was brilliant. And then amongst the lemon and the spices, you also got this slight earthy sort of fire barbecue charred taste as well. It was fantastic. It was really interesting to see him do that. So yes, he really does use food and drink to bespeak fellowship. And there are so many instances of it, of Christmas Carol. Obviously the big set pieces. At Fezziwig's party, he describes a great piece of cold roast, a great piece of boiled, there were mince pies, there was plenty of beer, there was the Cratchit's lunch, but also in the very first scene when we're seeing London, Scrooge has just left his office and is walking through it. He talks about the Lord Mayor's mansion house with, I think, 50 chefs preparing the feast as befits a Lord Mayor. When they're first on the street with the Ghost of Christmas Present, oh my word, the description of the grocers and the stores and the onions and the fruit and it's bulging out of the shops can't contain it. It's spilling out on it's a beautiful description. I absolutely love that passage.
That's the one.
Yeah, and the chestnuts and pot-bellied onions like Spanish friars. Is that the onions or apple? I can't remember. It's just such an amazing description, that one.
I never really noticed that the descriptions of the abundance of food were always connected with the jovial people, the people who were of good spirit, where in the beginning is, he's having his little dinner in his usual restaurant.
His melancholy dinner in his melancholy tavern.
Kind of picture, hunched over. And then later on, he's having a little bit of gruel by his.
That's right, by his fireside, alone.
Such a contrast.
And then when the Ghost of Christmas Present appears, what do we see? Food everywhere. His throne is made of food.
Sitting on it.
Yeah, exactly. So, here we are. This is what real life is like. There's you sitting in front of your fire with your little bowl of gruel. But look at this. This is real life. So it's a really interesting metaphor. There's an academic paper to be written on that very subject. I'm sure it has been, but
yeah, probably has. It's as he says, the scene with the Ghost of Christmas Present, that his fire blazing up, and you imagine it before it's been this tiny little kind of couple of coals smouldering away, producing very little heat, and then there's the fire blazing and all that abundance. You've never seen the likes of me before, man.
Yeah. And then you just made me think of something. The next morning, when Bob Cratchit comes into the office, or 2 mornings' time actually, what does Scrooge do? He doesn't give him a gift. He says he'll raise his salary. But the first thing he says is, now make up the fires and buy yourself a new coal scuttle.
Yeah.
That same image of the fire.
And
that's an interesting one.
His finances over a bowl of steaming bishop. So again, another punch. Because people might think it was just a drunk clergyman, but the steaming bishop. But
well, now I don't know if this is the truth, but apparently it's called a bishop. Because if you drink it and you're follically challenged like me, the top of your head tends to go a deep crimson, purpley colour, like a bishop's mitre. So that's why it's called a bishop.
Well, I'm prepared to give it a try. Just
it's delicious.
For the sake of experimentation.
Yeah, research. It's very important.
Your grandfather had a real fascination with the supernatural too, didn't he? I mean, this is obviously, it's a ghost story, but they're not ghosts the way we might think of ghosts as in deceased persons, but they're spirits of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they represent something. But he wrote a lot of ghost stories, didn't he?
You're right. He was absolutely had a fascination with that. And yes, he did. There were scenes in a lot of his earlier books, especially, let us say, Sketches by Boz, which was the original collection of short stories that he wrote. There are some in there, but certainly with the Pickwick Papers, which was the first big novel he wrote. There are lots of scenes of the supernatural in there. So yes, I guess he had a very strong belief and admiration for the ability to tell a story through that way. You can manipulate your readership in that way because there are no rules. The rules are suspended when it comes to the supernatural, which is what I was saying right at the beginning about me remembering they'd done it all in one night.
Of course,
You know,
they
if we
did.
follow the true rules of literature, they can't have done it all in one night. We were told that the ghosts were coming 1 o'clock on one night and 1 o'clock the next night, and there was the last stroke of 12 strikes on the next night. It's 3 days. And we're shown days, especially with a Christmas present. We're shown a day that starts in the morning and finishes in the evening. We're shown that. So we know it's taken 3 days, and yet there we are on Christmas morning. So yes, by using the supernatural, you can bend reality. You can lead your readers down whatever rabbit hole you want to, and take them whatever you need to do, which is a great thing. And people love them. You know, there's a long tradition of sitting around a fire on a cold Christmas night and telling ghost stories. You know, there you are, huddled up with the wind beating outside, and probably at the very moment when you're at your most terrified, a branch will slap the window and everybody will jump, you know. So it's a great tradition in Victorian and probably before to do that, to sit around at Christmas and tell these ghost stories. And he just took it to another level.
It was something that Rhonda didn't identify with when I mentioned about Christmas ghost stories, and because it's not a thing in America, associating Christmas and ghost stories.
It's in a couple of Christmas carols, the ghost stories at Christmas idea, but it wasn't part of our tradition, except for Christmas Carol. But that wasn't part of the American.
And that's a very interesting thing that Dickens achieved with A Christmas Carol. When he decided to write it, he took the decision to try and create something on the 5th of October, 1843. It was published, complete with illustrations and all the design and beautifully bound in leather and gold and all the rest of it. It was published on the 19th of December. So the 5th of October to the 19th of December, from the very first idea of doing it. So all of the writing, all of the production, everything in that 6-week time period. Absolutely unbelievable. So what was a good thing to base this story on? I need a safe hook to hang it on. And a ghost story at Christmas is a safe thing to do. It's a tradition. We all tell ghost stories at Christmas. Now, of course, having had the effect it had, we just think A Christmas Carol. That's a Christmas story. Fantastic. At the time, it's just a very easy hook to put a Christmas book on. Let's make it a ghost story. That's going to work well. And that's the subtitle being a ghost story of Christmas, not for Christmas, of Christmas, which, so he was just tapping into a well-known tradition and thinking this will work. Everybody loves a ghost story at Christmas. Let's make this story that.
I guess I didn't realize that it had been a tradition before that too. That's interesting.
I thought it was quite something when Doctor Who was revived again, sort of 2005 or whatever, with Christopher Eccleston, that one of the main characters in one of the stories was Charles Dickens. And Christopher Eccleston, as Doctor Who, says to him, "I love that ghost story you wrote." And he said, "Christmas Carol?" And he went, "No, The Signalman." And it's that is some story, The Signalman.
Oh, Signalman's great. It's so dark and so brooding, and so there's none of the Dickens jollity in that. That is a dark piece. It's one I perform on stage, the Signalman. I love performing it. And for those that don't know, the Signalman is a ghost story that's set on a stretch of railway line that appears to be haunted by a figure of doom, a portent of doom. And the poor old signalman, who's down in this deep, deep trench of a railway cutting, continually sees a figure standing at the mouth of the tunnel, either waving a warning to him or standing with his hands over his face like a gravestone or a tombstone. And every time the figure appears, some awful tragedy occurs on the line. Which leads up to the conclusion, which, if anyone hasn't read it, I won't spoil the plot. But The Signalman was written just a year after Dickens had been involved in a very serious rail crash that he was very lucky to survive. 10 people were killed in the crash. He was involved in the rescue effort. He held people in his arms as they died. He was tending to their wounds. And it had a massive effect on him. Now we know for sure, and it's often cited in textbooks on the subject, that he suffered very serious PTSD from it, from what he'd witnessed, not of the crash itself, but what he witnessed in the aftermath of the helping. So about a year afterwards, that's when he wrote The Signalman, about this haunted stretch of railway line, as if to sort of exorcise his experiences and his memories of it. So again, there's always a reason behind these things. You can always look back and find the reason. But The Signalman is a wonderful story. Yeah,
it is. I did wonder if there was any connection with the train crash that Charles was in, but I didn't know when The Signalman was written. So
yeah, no, it was just about a year later. And during that year, the problem was he was terrified of rail travel after that, as you would be. And yet he was now fully engaged in his reading tours, and the only way to do that was to use the railway system to get from city to city to undertake his obligations as a performer. He had to use the rail system. And his children noticed that even if in a hansom cab through the streets of London, if it just went over a little bump, he would grab hold of the seats and stare at the floor and tremble and sweat as if he were back in that rail carriage. It affected him very badly. So as the months went on, he began to get over it. But then during the summer, his dog, he had I can't remember the breed of it, but his dog strayed onto a railway line and was hit by a train and was killed. And it just seemed that this modern, fangled thing that was ripping the countryside apart, and he talked about that a lot in Dombey and Son as well. The rail system was just ripping life apart, and so yes, that's when he wrote the Signalman. But it was just about a year later.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. Really powerful
it is.
Story, and as you say, very dark. So, highly recommend people to go and look for The Signalman, because it's well worth a read.
It really is.
It's a very long story, but it's great.
No, it's a very short one. And back in 1973, I think, the BBC did an adaptation of it with Denham Elliott playing The Signalman.
Yeah.
And that's available on YouTube. Go and find it. It's great to watch. It sends chills down my spine still every time I watch it.
Yeah, well, I just mentioned that to Rhonda before we started the recording here, before you joined us, that I'm sure it was Denham Elliott that was on that production of
It was, yeah.
Production. So, yeah, a fabulous thing. Now, I mean, A Christmas Carol has been made into films many times. I wondered if you had any particular favourites.
The first thing to say about that question is I've never seen a version of A Christmas Carol that I haven't taken something from. They're all positive. I like something about every single one I've seen, even the ones that seem to go way out on a limb and go to a different place. There's always something I admire and I like. And that's because pretty well every time they keep his dialogue, his phraseology, his way of pacing the story, of telling the story. That's all there. So, having said that, I have three. that probably are at the top. One is the Alistair Sim one, because that's your baseline. You can't kind of go wrong. It's just joyful. It's wonderful. Can you ever help but smile and giggle at the end when he's leaping down the stairs in his nightshirt and he's calling to the boy and, the poor old housekeeper and all of that. It's beautiful. It's such fun. So you kind of can't go wrong with that. The second one is the George C. Scott one from 83 or 84, whenever they made that. I love the fact that George C. Scott, being George C. Scott, plays Scrooge in this big business-like manner. He's a titan of finance, of industry. We're getting away from the decrepit little hunched over figure that we so often see as Scrooge. We're seeing him as a businessman. And that was the point I was making earlier. Dickens tells us that. He is a businessman, a proper businessman. So I very much like that telling. The third one, and people always think I'm just saying this to get a cheap laugh, but it's not true. The third one I really admire and enjoy is the Muppets version.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, and what's not to like? I mean, we grew up in the Muppets, so what's not to like? But the actual serious reason I love it so much is because it's told by narrators. Okay, it's Gonzo and Rizzo Rat, but they are narrating the story, and they are using Dickens's narrative text. They lifted it straight out, and they used his text. So it's one of the only film versions where we get that narrative text. They all use the dialogue, and, there are phrases we could just traipse off easily because we've heard them a million times. I wear the chain I forged in life, come in, know me better, man. All of those. But because you've got that extra level in the Muppets version, it becomes a very true telling of the book. You know it because you read it every single year together. There's that lovely little tick that Dickens has, especially at the beginning, of talking directly to his reader as if I think he says, I'm sitting at your elbow,
Mm-hmm.
He suddenly breaks away from the narrative and just starts chatting to you.
Yeah.
There's a bit when he says Marley was as dead as a doornail. Do you know what's so dead about a doornail? I might think a coffin nail's the deadest piece of ironmonger of the trade. I don't know. But anyway, it's the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, so he was dead as a doornail. He suddenly breaks away and talks to you. So having Gonzo and Rizzo talking directly to us and saying, this bit's going to be a bit scary, take the kids away, is great. And that's pure Dickens. So I love that version. How about you? What are your favourites?
I am particularly fond of a version that was done for television with Patrick Stewart as Scrooge.
Yeah. Now that's an interesting one because he did the same as me and did a one-man performance of A Christmas Carol for many, many seasons in I think originally in Los Angeles a lot, then took it to Broadway, and I think he did do a season in London, but mainly Los Angeles was where he did it. And trust me, when you do a one-man performance of A Christmas Carol, you know everything about that text. You find every little detail. So I was fascinated to see that one. And I was reading his autobiography last year, and it was really interesting reading his passages about preparing that show. I can absolutely resonate with what he said. So yes, no, that's a wonderful one too.
I thought that Richard E. Grant was about 18 inches too tall.
Yeah.
For Bob Cratchit.
He did well,
He
though.
does
He did
plays
kind
it.
of flinching and, like he was expecting to be smacked at any moment. He bore it well.
Of course, that was a problem that anyone against George C. Scott didn't have. There was this massive physical presence of the Scrooge. Everybody looked small against him.
Also very fond of the Muppets version and Alistair Sim, who I've got a particular connection with, because I don't have a connection with Alistair Sim myself, but my children do, because on their mother's side of the family, the previous Mrs. Muir, Alistair Sims was her great granduncle. So my children's great granduncle.
Wow.
And and my son, actually, I remember seeing a documentary about him where there was a piece of film from the late 30s or so, so it was quite an early film for him. And he's got this very heavy kind of hooded eyes. And I thought, holy shit, that's Danny. Like
Danny got it from.
my son, the eyes were just so similar. And I thought,
How interesting.
well, there you go, So
How interesting.
those are kind of favorite. Yourself, Rhonda?
All of those you've mentioned, and also, I can't help it, the Disney version with Jim Carrey.
That's interesting you say that, because I was determined not to like that. My attitude to that was the same as you'd mentioned about The Man Who Invented Christmas. I went into that absolutely with the intention to dislike it, partly because they billed it as Disney's A Christmas Carol,
Right.
which I thought was taking a slight liberty. But actually, they did an amazing job with it. Amazing job.
A couple of chase scenes and things.
There's one bizarre scene where they go off down the sewers for the Ghost of Christmas. Yeah, I don't know what all that was about. But apart from that, I thought it was really lovely.
And again,
and what's interesting, the edit and a lot of the choices they made was very close to my show that I do. And I thought, well, when did Jim Carrey come and sit in the back and watch my show and take notes? And
Maybe he did.
when did he do that?
Is that what you're doing now in America?
Yeah. That's what I'm here to do. So I'm here the day after Thanksgiving, dear old Black Friday, which the American nation has now given to Britain as well. Thanks for that. And yes, I'll be performing it this evening in a beautiful theatre, and then from there touring for about 3 weeks, and then back home into England and continuing the tour up until 23rd of December. So.
Right. So whereabouts are you now?
Nashua, New Hampshire. So this next week I'm all around New England, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and then go down to Virginia, and then sort of Pennsylvania, New York, finishing. And then one of my previous trips, I was over in California and in the Midwest, in Missouri and Nebraska and Minnesota, and one performance down in Florida as well. It's very odd performing A Christmas Carol when the sun outside is at 90 and people are going out in their boats and shorts and t-shirts.
Rhonda's got 3 daughters in Virginia, so
really?
Yeah, where are you going to be in Virginia?
Pop in by and have a cup of tea.
It's a little town called Waynesville. And I can't think where it's near, really. It's sort of on the Blue Ridge Mountains.
That's not too
bad. There. I used to perform in Williamsburg and Richmond and Occoquan, a lovely little village not far from DC. So yeah, I know Virginia quite well.
Beautiful area.
And during lockdown, I mean, you did it as a pay-per-view.
Yeah,
online,
that was fun.
Which we bought at the time and thoroughly enjoyed. Yes. I mean, you really did a fantastic rendition of it.
It was great fun to do. And I've never done anything like it before, but taking what is essentially a stage show where you're connecting very precisely with the audience and talking directly to them. Suddenly I had to find a way of telling the story without a audience or without a response. And I chose locations. All the locations in that film were places that Dickens had used in his novels that had inspired scenes in his novels. Not necessarily A Christmas Carol. In fact, I don't think at all in A Christmas Carol. But all the churchyard scenes were filmed at the churchyard that features at the beginning of Great Expectations when the convict appears to Pip out on the marshes. All the interior stuff of Scrooge's office and Fred's party scene were in a house called oh crikey, can't even remember the name of it now. Anyway, an old house in Rochester that features in the Pickwick Papers and The Mystery of Edwin Drood. The Cratchit's household was in an old almshouse called that features in a piece Dickens wrote called The Six-Port Travellers, where he looks in this place where travellers could pay just a very small amount of money and be given lodging and food for the night. So it was fun to use proper locations, proper Dickens locations all the way through that. And we only had 2.5 days to film it because it was just in this tiny period between lockdowns.
A bubble.
We weren't sure we were going to be able to tour, and then suddenly we were released for a few days to rush down to Rochester with the camera and with the cinematographer and rushed it through, which means there's some horrendous lapses in continuity, which we never managed to sort out. The worst one being when he's describing colder yet foggier, a piercing, biting cold. In the background of that scene, there is the biggest wrought iron radiator you've ever seen in your life. Every time I see it, I think, no, why didn't we notice that? But it was fun to do. It was great fun to make. I enjoyed
We
it.
didn't notice.
No, we
Good.
thoroughly enjoyed
I've
it.
blown it now. Every time you know.
We had a very dear friend of mine, Bryce Wilson, who was my boss at the museum for many years and has illustrated books with me and such like. And he was in a bubble with us because we're in Stromness, and his brother was in Kirkwall, and so we had him in a bubble, so we could have him down to watch it as well with us, which was just a real treat for him as well, because he was really feeling the isolation, because some of us actually followed the guidelines.
I know.
The rules in
Yes.
lockdown.
Some of us did, yeah.
Didn't go to visit people and didn't have parties
Didn't have
every
parties,
night.
no?
I can't think who you are alluding to. I don't know what this.
Nobody. I'm just
This
thinking out loud
very
here.
subtle.
Yes, but I've been called a few things in my time, but subtle's a new one. So I mean, for him, it was just being able to get out and come down here, or we could go up there, and it was so a lot of things going on online. I did a lot of storytelling online as well at that time, and also recorded stories as well, which is still up there on the website.
Very nice.
Just as something to try to help people get through it. And I mean, what you did there was something that maybe I wouldn't say secondary to what you were intending to do, but it really did help people get through that.
Well, that's
It gave
wonderful to know.
something to look forward to, and something just to enjoy and to just soak up, because
Feeling of connection too.
Yeah.
It's such an odd time. You don't realize how we take for granted our everyday communications with other people.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it came across like that. I mean, the original decision to make it was to do that, but specifically for the audiences that came to see me every year when I was on tour, especially in America, where this show has become a big tradition for a lot of families. It is sort of a bit like pantomime. You know, people come back year after year, and they know the jokes and they know the bits that are coming up, and they play along with it all. So I just wanted to continue that tradition. But if it went further than that, and people that have never seen the show before also felt that's a wonderful thing to hear.
You'll have
I'm
to
really-
come to
thank you.
Orkney and do it one year.
I'd love to.
You'd get a full house.
you sure would.
No, that would be great. I'd love to do that.
Well, put it like this, Ian McKellen came here.
Our sort of hideaway place, my wife and I, where we run away to is it's a little town of Cromarty in the Highlands, just north of Inverness.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I know.
you know, I could extend. We could come up and
Pop up, yeah.
yeah. Just I hope we can get across the Pennell and Firth and and do the thing. But,
It was
I'd
lovely.
I visited.
You-
I bet. I visited the Orkneys on 2 or 3 occasions, and what an amazing place! It's sort of mystical and astounding. I both times I just came away being profoundly moved by being there.
You need to get in touch, and we can show you places that you probably haven't seen, and tell you the stories behind them as well, because there's a lot of little hidden gems as well.
It's an amazing
But,
place.
when Ian McKellen was doing his tour, you know, around small theatres to mark his 80th birthday, the last gig was at the Arts Theatre in Kirkwall, here in Orkney.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of people from the Isles were complaining that they didn't get an opportunity to buy a ticket because we went down at some ungodly hour of the morning. I mean, it was like about sort of 6 o'clock or something like that to join the queue. The doors opened at 9, and it was raining, of course. And but we stood there anyway.
Party atmosphere. It was fun.
Yeah, no, everybody it was kind of wonderful. But we were in the queue there anyway, and then people from the Isles were saying, "Well, that's not fair because we couldn't queue," or well, I went along and it was already sold out. They opened the doors at 8:30 instead of 9 because the queue was around the building. And,
Wow.
So by the time that the kind of doors were meant to be open, the tickets were already sold.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have mattered, because the queue was there anyway.
Yeah. Anyway.
But they complained, and he got to hear about it and said, well, in that case, I'll do a second show. And so people from the Isles were able to kind of book tickets online and go along to that. So, I thought, top bloke. But absolutely, it would be something that would go down incredibly well here.
Yeah, this is a very artsy place. People love things like what you're doing.
I'd love to.
I would
I'd
love
love
things
to.
like what you're doing.
Okay. We'll try and make this happen. I don't know how, within the constraints of my current tour, but we'll try.
Squeeze us in.
It'll be wonderful.
When did you start doing this? Because I mean, you're a professional actor.
Mm-hmm. The first time I did anything Dickens related was A Christmas Carol in 1993. I've been acting before that since the age of 9, when I was a super large cockerel in a nativity play, which is a whole other story. But I'd sort of purposefully detached myself from having anything professionally to do with Charles Dickens. I wasn't particularly interested in him at that point. That was my dad's gig. I was going to change the world with very modern theatre, all those idealistic things that drama students tend to do. But in 1993, it was the 150th anniversary of A Christmas Carol's publication. And there was lots of publicity throughout the country about it. The Royal Mail issued a new set of Christmas stamps that were illustrated by Quentin Blake, featuring scenes from the books. And there were lots of documentaries made about A Christmas Carol and its enduring legacy and all these sorts of things. And a lady, I was living in Kent at that point, a lady who was responsible for raising funds for a local charity came to me and said, look, this is too good an opportunity to miss. There's all this publicity about Christmas Carol. We're coming towards the Christmas season. Charles gave dramatic readings from the story. You're an actor. Can we recreate one of those readings that Dickens did? And I didn't really want to do it. I didn't know how to do it. But I agreed to because it was for a charity. And at that point, I went to my dad, who, as I said earlier, was this big scholar, fan, knew everything there was to know about Dickens. So I was convinced he would put me right. He'd tell me how to do it. So I went to him and said, I've been asked to do a reading of A Christmas Carol. Do you have any advice? I don't know how Dickens did it. I don't know if there's any documentary sort of material about his style or how he performed it or anything else. So can you help me? And Dad looked at me. Firstly, he was absolutely delighted that one of his children was showing the slightest interest in Charles Dickens. And then he said, the only advice I have for you is not to try too hard because Charles Dickens has done all the work for you. And that's all he said. And it wasn't really the all-encompassing advice I was hoping for. Didn't help very much. But he was actually right. So I went back as my starting point, used a script that Dickens had used for his readings. So he'd edited it right down for his readings. So that seemed a pretty good place to start. And I said, well, how do I get the characters? How do I do this? Otherwise, it's just going to be this monotone narrative for 90 minutes. That's not going to work. So I need to break it up. I need to make these characters live. So let's go to the description of Scrooge, the first description of Scrooge. How's that going to pan out? Maybe that will give me a clue. So I flipped to that bit. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. He was hard and sharp as flint. He was secret, self-contained, solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, and you got to the end of the sentence, and you just were him. You didn't have to do anything. You just read the piece, and your body sort of contorted as you read, because that's what that narrative does. You know, the cold within him froze his old features. It's from within him. You can feel him shrinking into himself. It's incredible. And that's how it started. And I just built every little character using the same thing, going back to the original description and seeing what came to me, what seemed to work.
So you had original scripts from Charles Dickens. I mean, presumably...
The text of. This is sadly not the original actual scripts, but... Yeah.
But you had other ones as well, so that you could do other readings? Or...
Yeah.
Because I know that you...
There was a scholar called Philip Collins who made it his life work to research everything about the Dickens readings. And he published a couple of wonderful books featuring all of the scripts that Dickens performed, and with sort of notes as to how he did it and why he did it. And a lot of scripts that Dickens prepared but didn't perform, which also interests me. One of which was The Signalman. He prepared it as a reading but never performed it, which is an interesting thing. So yes, that's absolutely goldmine of material, because you can begin to see. And what changed for me in performing A Christmas Carol, what changed my relationship with Charles Dickens at that point, was I began to see him as a fellow actor. That was the connection. I wasn't connected to a writer. I wasn't connected to the novelist. I was connected to a performer. And as soon as I felt that, everything fell into place. You know, and that helped me. So,
were there any annotations on it as to, you know, like the tempo or
some of them,
quieter here or build up to a crescendo? Or...
Yeah, some of them. Trying to think if there are in A Christmas Carol. I'm not sure, but certainly in ones, the reading he was very well known for was The Murder of Nancy from Oliver Twist, Sykes and Nancy. And in that one, he has underlining 3 times and build tension here and murder coming and things like that written in the margin notes. Why he wrote murder coming, I think he probably knew. I don't know. Or why he felt he had to remind himself there was a murder coming in this particular reading. But anyway.
You may have had an inkling about that one.
But yes, so there were little notes.
Wow.
But I also made up my mind with that first reading of A Christmas Carol not to try and absolutely recreate what he did. I wanted it to be my telling of it. So I used his script. I didn't, at that point, research too deeply into exactly what he'd done. I just wanted that be my take on it.
No, you're quite right. I occasionally mentor young storytellers, and I tell them the same thing, actually, is that you got to make the stories your own. You know, you might hear somebody telling a story and you think, I like that. But you're not a tribute act. You know, you make it your own, you take it, you tell it in your own way, you make it your own, you own it. And exactly the same as you're saying. Yeah.
And there's no point being a Dickens tribute act, because nobody knows what he sounded like, or, you know, it's a complete pointless exercise, really. The lovely thing about A Christmas Carol especially is, of course, everybody in the audience knows the story. So you haven't actually got to worry too much about storytelling. Therefore, you can concentrate on atmosphere and character and movement and creating all the other things around it, because the audience knows that this is the ghost of Christmas past, and we're seeing visions of the past, and we're going to see him at school, and we're going to see Fezziwig, and we're going to see his fiancée. They know all that because they've seen it a million times. So that's a rather sort of liberating part of it, actually. You haven't got to worry terribly much about getting the plot over.
you have a particularly favourite line from Christmas Carol.
And it's just a portion of a line, really. He talks about, well, this is Marley actually telling Scrooge that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, talking about, basically life and people and goodness and everyone being able to have a positive effect on those around them. And just that little phrase, working kindly in their little sphere, it strikes me always, every time. I love it, because it is something that everyone, even, everyone now, every day can do. We can work kindly in our little spheres. And I think that makes it
in our little, that's a beautiful bit.
Part of what makes the story so.
I was asked in a Q&A session. I was asked in a Q&A session a few years ago, was Marley Scrooge's only friend? It's the only person he'd had a friendship with. And that opened up a really interesting sort of thought, is friendships, who he had a connection with. And that whole scene between him and Marley is the only time in the first half of the book that he uses anybody's name. So when Fred comes, he's just called the nephew. The charity collectors don't have names. They are the charity collectors. He doesn't call Bob Cratchit. He's just the clerk. And then the only name we get in the first part of the book is Jacob Marley. And he uses it a lot. When he sees the knocker, he says he hadn't thought about Jacob Marley since thinking about him earlier that evening. Yeah, it's Marley. It's Jacob Marley. When he's talking to him, speak comfort to me, old Jacob. It's the name again and again and again. But he doesn't use anybody else's name. We get to the end of the story. Suddenly he's talking about nephew Fred. He's talking about Bob Cratchit. He's talking about the Cratchit family and little Tim. He mentioned Marley's name once. I said upon my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. The rest of it, Marley is just forgotten. The friendships have moved on. I thought it was such an interesting thing, and that's what I meant earlier, when I'm always discovering new things in the book. And it was just that little question that set me off down that bit of thinking. It's a very interesting thing.
Today, just before we started speaking, I picked up one of our numerous copies of Christmas Carol.
We have an embarrassing number of
thumbing through.
Me too.
Arthur Rackham illustrations. And there was the line of the two gentlemen when he is with the ghost of Christmas yet to come. And they're sort of saying, so, I hear old Scratch has got his own at last.
Got his own.
And I knew that Old Scratch is a term for the devil. And I always, for some reason, had it in my head that they were referring to Scrooge as Old Scratch. But of course they're not. The devil has got his own because Scrooge has died. And he belonged to him, and so he's off to hell. So Old Scratch
he's got him back.
Got his own at last. And it's like, how stupid of me not to figure that. But I mean, I've read it so many times and I've seen so many adaptations. But like you said, you pick it up, you find something new in it.
New every time.
So
I noticed something too. This, I don't know if this means anything or not, but each of the spirits, when he's describing them, even for instance the ghost of Christmas Present, who is always presented as basically a male figure. He calls all the ghosts, all the spirits are called it. They're not he or she, as the case may be. It's it. And Tom said, well, that's probably because they're not human. That sets them apart as something foreign, something other, these spirits.
Yeah.
Is there any...
It's interesting with performances of the Ghost of Christmas Past, and I'm just as guilty as this. It's always this sort of feminine, gentle, ethereal creature. And the truth is, it's impossible to present the Ghost of Christmas Past because, when he first describes it, it's got 17 heads and 6 legs and 2 bodies and 7 arms and 3, it's nothing. It's So I suppose as storytellers, we always have to settle it down into something that's going to talk and guide him. It's slightly lazy to do it that way, but yeah, it is interesting. You're right. It's it. There we are. You using acceptable pronouns back then, you know. What do you going to call yourself? He was so ahead of his time.
Is there any particular favourite? Yeah. Is there any particular favourite part of the story that really resonates with you? Is there something that you really love? Any passage or?
I love lots of different pieces for different reasons. I love the atmosphere he creates at the beginning. That dark, heavy, mysterious atmosphere in London. Foggier yet, colder, piercing, biting cold. And the solitude when he's back at the lodgings and he's feeling the back of the door as if he's terrified that Marley's pigtail is sticking through it, having just seen the face in the knocker. I just find the darkness in all of that just astounding. And I sort of remember that in that reading when I was 6, when I first heard it, feeling so cold listening to that passage. I think that's incredible. I love the scene when he's traveling with the ghost of Christmas Present across the rocky moors, across the oceans, out to the lighthouse, into the ship. I love that travel scene, which doesn't feature in my show, which frustrates me no end, but I just can't. I can't have enough time to do that justice. When I'm performing it, there's the moment when they go back to the Cratchit's house with the ghost of yet to come. And there's silence. He says, it was quiet. It was very quiet. And if the show's going well, you can feel that absolute silence throughout a theatre, you know, with 1,000 people in it, or however many people are there, just hanging on this moment. 3 words: quiet, very quiet. And everyone's there. They're hooked in it. And that is such a moving scene. Such a moving scene. When the Cratchit family have lost, and Bob is grieving so deeply, so completely deeply. And yet Mrs. Cratchit kind of isn't. But she's doing what any Victorian mother had to do, and that is look after the rest of the family. You know, in the Victorian era, you would be losing children. You would. It was a fact of life. Yeah. But there are the other children. They have to be looked after. They have to be cared for. And there she is looking after them and sewing and doing her needlework. And all of the family are so deeply concerned about little Bob and looking after him. I always think it's his tragedy. It's not Tim's tragedy. It's Bob's tragedy. And I find that an utterly moving scene. The other scene that has come to me over the last few years, and I've been adding more and more of it into the show, much to the frustration of people that are trying to keep it to a sensible time, but is the Marley scene, the piece you just quoted, Rhonda. His talking about, you know, the people being his life, his business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, benevolence, all my business. And that pain he feels not to be able to reach out and help. And then when Scrooge looks out the window and there are all these other ghosts in the air, and there's a mother on the street, and the ghosts can't help her. You know, the pain they feel from that is an amazing piece of writing. And I knew as soon as you asked the question, what I'd do is go through every single scene in the book and say, I love that bit and love that bit, because that's how it is. But I think there are a few standouts.
I would sit and listen to it all night, I can assure you. Because, I mean, it's a treat hearing somebody else saying it. Also, I mean, you're not reading it, of course. You're reciting it from memory.
Yeah.
So that's quite something as well.
There's a good story behind that as well. When I started doing it back in 93, it was a reading.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it remained a reading for maybe 2 or 3 seasons, maybe 3. And by that time, I'd started traveling to the United States and was performing quite a bit. So doing a reading, when I first worked out how to do it, you have a book in your left hand, so you can't do anything with your left hand. So all the gestures had to come from the right hand. So I developed a whole series of points and ways that the ghosts held their hands in different ways and made it quite skeletal for the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and sort of much more welcoming and big and bold for the Christmas present, and slightly floaty and ethereal for past, and all of the characters had their own way of doing it. And I was doing 2 shows in one day. One in a little town in southern Tennessee called Fayetteville. And it was in the blandest function room of the blandest Holiday Inn you will ever find in your life. And I was performing to members of the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce, none of whom really wanted to be there.
Oh.
And it was not a good space. Anyway, I did the thing, and God bless us, everyone, and took my bows and said, I'm really sorry, I've got to run because I've got another performance this evening down in Alabama, and it's quite a tight run to get there on time. So goodbye, thank you. Didn't change out of costume, stayed in costume, leapt into a car, drove off down to Alabama. We got lost. So we're late arriving at the second venue, which was a library. So by the time I got there, all the audience were already sat, waiting. At which point, I realized that I'd left the book for the reading back up in Tennessee.
Ooh.
And I had no time to do anything. I couldn't print another version out. I was just stuck with the audience sat there waiting for me. And I stood there and I thought, I wonder if I can remember it. I've been doing it for 3 years. I've been reading it and I've been watching all the film versions. So all these lines just, I wonder if I can do it. So I started performing it. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial. And I discovered that every phrase lent to the next phrase. There was never anywhere I came up against a barrier and thought, I don't know what happens now. So at which point I thought, well, there's no point me standing at a podium in the middle, just as if I was doing a reading. Let's improvise. Let's make, hey kids, let's make a show. So I sort of kicked got rid of the podium, and there was a chair there. So, okay, well, the chair can be used as Scrooge's office, but it can then become his chair by the fire when he's eating his gruel when he sees Marley, and it can become his bed. That's fine. So that will stay over to the right of the stage. That's always Scrooge's space, whatever's going on. Then there was a little stool, and in that situation, I think it was probably a chrome stool with a vinyl top. Anyway, it's fine. So that could become Bob Cratchit's stool, and later it would become Tiny Tim's stool by the fire. So all these things. So I was going through the show working on 3 different levels. One was trying to remember the lines, which kind of looked past himself. One was giving a performance that I'd always given. And the third was sort of from somewhere up above, looking down on myself, thinking, how can I stage manage this? How can I move things around? Where do I need to be at any given time? It was incredible. It was so liberating. And I got to the end of the show and said, God bless everyone. I can't believe I've just done that. And a lady came up to me afterwards and said, thank you, Mr. Dickens. That was wonderful. We really didn't expect it to be a performance. We expected it to be a reading. And I said to her, well, that's a coincidence, because so did I. And then she said, and it was truly inspiring watching you work with your medical condition. I said, what? I'm absolutely fine. I've a bit of a, sore throat, but other than that, no, I think I'm doing fine. I said, no. I used to be a nurse, but I just wanted you to know I could see what you were dealing with, and it was very inspiring. What on earth are you talking about? What had happened? I'd been so busy working on these 3 different levels, trying to move furniture around and remember the lines and everything else. that the performance itself had just happened on automatic pilot. So I was doing all these big gestures with my right hand, and my left arm was doing absolutely nothing at all. And she was convinced I'd suffered a terrible stroke and had paralysis all down the left-hand side of my body, and my left arm just didn't work because I was doing all these big, bold gestures with one hand, and this one was doing absolutely nothing at all.
Oh, wow.
But it was an amazing thing. And people often ask me, how long did it take me to learn it? Well, the answer is I don't know, because it all happened on that day by absolute accident, by my own clumsiness in forgetting the script. And it released me. It changed the show completely and gave me so much more license to play about with it and find ways of telling the story through theatre as well as just the words.
Wonderful.
Voices. You were saying that you didn't want to just do it as a monologue, you know, in a monotone. It's a monologue, but a monotone, I mean. So do you have different voices for the different characters?
Yeah.
Would you give us a taste?
So some of that is lifted straight from the text. So Scrooge's voice, that passage I was reciting earlier, when we get the description of Scrooge, it finished and spoke out in his grating voice. So it says it's grating, and we have to place him in London. So it's a quite a well-to-do accent. He's a businessman. I wanted it to be very sharp, very firm, cutting off the words precisely. He's barking almost his words. So from a theatrical point of view, I therefore wanted Cratchit to be completely the opposite to that. Originally, I wanted to give him a Welsh accent because it's lyrical and beautiful and gentle, and then discovered I couldn't do Welsh, and I sort of kept ending up somewhere in the subcontinent. So I sort of abandoned that idea, but gave him a Cornish accent for the same reason, very gentle, very soft. And in his movements, I sort of had him tugging at his clothes, and especially when he's talking to Scrooge, he's always a bit nervous and a bit, so all of that sort of thing. So you've got you'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose. If it is quite convenient, sir, it is not convenient. It is not fair. You would think yourself ill-used if I were to stop you half a. It is only once a year, Mr. Scrooge. So there was that way of showing the difference between the characters in both the way they stand and move and the voices. Christmas Past, we sort of talked on already, this very gentle, ethereal sort of, I am the ghost of Christmas Past, which actually does become monotone. And Marley actually is quite monotone as well, because Scrooge tells us that he's put up with the dull conversation of the ghost, so I didn't want Marley to be too exciting. Christmas Present, I just make this big, bluff, larger-than-life Yorkshireman. Come in. And he's kind of based on the Ghost of Christmas Present in the Muppets version. I love him. He's just so good. when he keeps repeating the same line, come in, know me better, man. And Michael Caine says, you seem a little absent-minded spirit. He says, no, I'm a big absent-minded spirit. That's one of my favourite lines in that.
Yeah.
So he's sort of that. What other voices? Well,
I always kind of thought of Christmas Present as sort of like Brian Blessed.
Yes, absolutely.
Big booming, larger than life, exuberant.
You're so right. Brian Blessed is the Ghost of Christmas Present. So some of the voices are lifted from the description we get in the text. Others are put in there for theatrical purposes to create a scene.
Oh. How about like Tiny Tim and such like?
Tiny Tim doesn't get to say very much. You only got one line, and guess what that is? I try not to play him up too much, to make him too sweet. On the whole, when I'm watching adaptations, the more saccharine, sickly sweet Tiny Tim is, the less I like it. The poor kid is very ill and weak. And from this family, so every now and then, the only line he has in my show is when they're all gathered around making a toast to Christmas, and Bob says, "God bless us," and he says, "God bless us, everyone." But it's a very quick line. It's just, and so is Tiny, "God bless us, everyone," and then Scrooge is instantly, "Spirit, tell me if Tiny Tim will live." So I don't do him very much. Mrs. Cratchit equally is this sort of Cornish. Why the Cratchit family moved to London from Cornwall, I don't know. Don't go there.
People moved around,
But she's always rubbing her hands on her apron. I wear a long Victorian frock coat, so you can do all sorts with the frocks on that. So that becomes an apron, and she can wipe her hands on it. And while she's cooking the Christmas pudding, she's in this panic about whether it's working or not. And then when Cratchit is at home, and he's talking about how did Tiny Tim behave today, oh, as good as gold and better, he suddenly loses the stutter. He loses all the nervousness. He's suddenly in his own domain. He's confident. Same accent, same voice, but without the nervous tics.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good...
And when he goes back to work on Christmas morning, of course, he doesn't know Scrooge has undergone this reformation, and the only thing he knows is that he's late to work and he's going to get it absolutely in the neck.
Mm-hmm.
And Scrooge is playing the trick on him by, I think you are behind your time. And at that moment, I have Cratchit breaking out of that nervousness and suddenly decides to stand up to Scrooge. And he says, it's only once a year, Mr. Scrooge, and there's no hesitation. It's quite a definite, firm voice. And what does Scrooge say? I'm going to raise your salary. And the first time Bob stands up to him, okay, wish I'd tried that before.
And of course, so much came into popular tradition from this as well. I mean, people had been rearing turkeys in Norfolk since the 17th century, I believe. So turkeys were not new, but they were not common as a bird that was eaten at Christmas.
No.
A goose was the traditional one, goose or duck, or even a piece of roast beef. But I mean, that must have been great for the turkey.
The turkey industry, maybe he had shares. Listen, lads, I've got this great idea. I'm going to write a book. We'll sell more turkeys next Christmas than they've ever seen. Yeah. But Christmas was changing at that time anyway. The influence of Prince Albert was changing the way the English were celebrating Christmas. The Germanic influence of bringing a tree into the house and decorating it and hanging candles on it, of giving gifts, of having huge feasts. Up to that point, Christmas had been much more of a sort of pagan-inspired celebration, or not even a celebration. It was just a passing of the darkest days of the year and looking forward to the spring coming again. So Dickens was at hand a journalist, and he was right there to record this change in attitude and popularize it. So he didn't invent Christmas, as the film suggested, but he was blooming well there to market it very well.
I have heard
actually, the same year Christmas Carol was published, the first Christmas card was published as well.
Oh,
that was released in 1843.
Yeah. In my childhood, Christmas was usually depicted as being a very snow-covered time, and things like stagecoaches and such like on Christmas cards. It was Victorian.
Very.
And even things like Tins of Quality Street, they were all Victorian people.
Yes, and carol singers under gas lamps. In a little glow of light. Yeah, very, very Victorian in image. Yeah.
But of course, that was based on the fact that in his young days, there was a kind of mini ice age, as they refer to it sometimes.
I believe so. The Thames froze, and they had the frost fairs on the Thames, and
and so snow and all that. So, I mean, when he writes about Christmas, he's writing about his own childhood, and that's what he remembers. The snowy, beautiful snowy scenes.
Yes.
So...
certainly, Rhonda, in America, people in the audience are very upset when I tell them, well, not so much further north, but where I am in England, in Oxfordshire, we very rarely have snow at Christmas. And but you've got to have snow. You can't have a British Christmas without snow. I'm sorry. It very rarely happens. I can remember maybe two in my lifetime.
I can assure you it's a very rare occurrence here. And actually,
there as well. Okay.
I mean, climate has changed in my lifetime. Because the summers used to be warmer. I mean, we had seasons, which we don't anymore.
No.
It's just that in the summer you can see the shite weather for better for longer because it's daylight the whole time, you know. But frost and snow has really kind of not entirely disappeared, but virtually.
Yeah,
has.
no, I agree.
Whereas in my youth, then, I mean, you know, you would expect Christmas to be, well, not Christmas, as it would be snow covered and frost and, you know, the stars, tullimenton, as we say, glittering in the firmament. But all that's kind of not happening anymore. And you shouldn't be able to see that in a lifetime, you know.
Hi, this is Rhonda. Tom and I want to say thank you for listening and to let you know that we have a website too, Orkneyology.com. Also a YouTube channel and an independent press, Orkneyology Press. We've got some exciting plans for the future. If you enjoy what we're doing, the best way you can help us to grow is to leave us a review and a like wherever you listen and tell your friends. And if you're so inclined, you can buy us a dram on Ko-fi. That's Ko-fi. Just search for Ko-fi/Orkneyology. Thanks so much. Enjoy. We won't keep you much longer. We're hoping to talk about your book because I didn't realize that you had written a book about your performances. And
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, last year, so 2023, was 30 years of performing A Christmas Carol. And I thought there are so many stories to tell. When I'm on tour, I write a daily blog about blog post about everything that's gone on. And that's got quite a following and people enjoy it. Mainly it's about breakfast and laundry, but you know, when you're on tour, things happen and wonderful anecdotes happen and you see stuff. And so I just thought I'd start writing about what I was doing every day. And it just struck me reading back on some of those that it would be fun to write a book about 30 years touring A Christmas Carol. So the book, which is Gerald Dickens' My Life on the Road with a Christmas Carol, it starts with how I started in acting, age 9, the nativity play, and then working up how my acting career sort of continued, that first reading of A Christmas Carol, how I then adapted it, how the tour started, all of that going on. And then I thought it would be fun to take the readers, a lot of whom are going to be people that come to my shows regularly, that this is a book that's really going to sell to the audiences, to take them through my adaptation of A Christmas Carol line by line and just say, this is why I do this scene. This is why I perform it like I do. There's a few points that are just played for absolute laughs, apparently. When old Joe comes in to sell the goods of Scrooge, I have him coming on and wiping his nose and then having this horrible, slimy length of snot hanging around, and he's playing about with it. And if it's in a nice, intimate setting, I'll wipe it on somebody's arm in the front row of the audience or on my own coat or whatever. And then you can hear the audience going, oh, God, gross, that's horrible. And the reason I do that is because the passage in the book that relates to the neighborhood where old Joe is talking about effluent disgorging into the street. And it's a vile bit of writing. And I just wanted to capture that horror in a single moment. So if I can get the whole audience going, oh, God, gross, then, okay, job done. Now, everybody thinks it's just me looking, again, for a nice quick laugh by doing a sort of schoolboy playground snot joke, but it works in that moment. So there are all sorts of little bits within the story that people are fascinated by. And then the very last bit of the book is I just published my own script as it was last year. That's now out of date because I adapt it every single year. And unlike you, Tom, you say you read the whole book every year. Well, so do I. And every year I think, oh, I can't leave that little passage out, or I can't leave that. So the show has just grown and grown and grown and grown over the years because I keep putting little bits in. So that's what the book is. It's all about my life touring, some of the anecdotes, some of the memorable venues I perform in, but also then the creation of the show itself and how it's come to where it is now. Some of the wonderful venues I perform in, the most remarkable ones are places that Dickens himself performed, standing on the same stage, saying the same words to the same auditorium. That, if you want a ghost story, that sends a chill down your spine. That's amazing. One of the loveliest of those is a venue in Liverpool, St George's Hall, the concert room in St George's Hall, that Dickens said is the most perfect room to perform in the world. And I'm absolutely with him on that. It's just a glorious room to perform in. And it has a big glass crystal chandelier. And when the auditorium is full, the heat rises, all the glass facets start moving and they clink and chink with this very quiet sort of clinking sound. And I think, and he heard that. He heard the same noise. And it just blows my mind. It's incredible. Yeah. So that's the book.
So you were slightly breaking up there. That what caused the chandelier to clink? The applause?
Just the heat of an audience. The rising heat from the hall. And of course, when he was performing, he was doing it with gas lighting and presumably probably candles as well. So there would be more heat. You just hear this begin to move and shake and all these ding, 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 ding. It's incredible.
Lovely. What's the book called?
It's called Gerald Dickens, My Life on the Road with a Christmas Carol. My blog post is called On the Road with Gerald Dickens, so I took the same kind of title for that. I also wrote a book about the Staplehurst rail crash as well, and leading up to the writing of The Signalman, as we talked about earlier. So that's Dickens and Staplehurst, a biography of a rail crash. That's another one.
Just so grateful that you've taken this time, especially when you're in the middle. Well, you just arrived in America and you're just about to start your tour. And thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I love talking it all through. I love thinking about it and discussing it and sharing it with like-minded people who have a similar passion for this ghostly little book, as he called it. It's always wonderful to chat. So I really appreciate you reaching out and inviting me to talk about it at such length. It's been such fun.
Just wonderful. And it's lovely to have you come in and to know you better, man.
Oh, goodbye.
This is the time of year that I keep doing Christmas carol quotes on a regular basis.
You asked me right back at the beginning what are my childhood memories of A Christmas Carol, and another one is my dad doing exactly that. Every aspect of Christmas was another quote from A Christmas Carol. You know, as he brought the turkey in, it could never have stood upon its legs that day. He just quoted all the time, and I do it now.
I just must tell you before you go through that I was once asked by Radio Scotland, they were doing the favourite dialect word of the day. And I was invited to go along to BBC Radio Orkney and record my favourite dialect word. Now, I was trying to think, what is my favourite Orkney dialect word? And I thought, well, what is the one that sounds absolutely filthy, but is actually completely innocent? Because I do have that kind of childish brain, and personality. And I thought, scrunt. That is a perfect word, a scrunt. And it means a miser. And so he was a right scrunt. And so I said that if Charles Dickens had been Orcadian, he may have started A Christmas Carol with Ebenezer Scrooge was a right scrunt. I have no idea.
I see that having been carefully changed in many a school production.
Anyway, we have taken up a lot of your time.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
It's been such a delight speaking to you. I hope that we will keep in touch and that we'll be able to take you around Orkney and show you around.
Let's do this Orkney gig. Let's make it happen somehow.
year, so I've got tons of
Let's
time.
make it happen somehow.
Tons of time. That would be fantastic. You're
Oh,
very welcome,
be great.
you and your family.
Thank
Good
you.
luck with the rest with your tour and
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I hope it all goes well, and what lies beyond that with touring in Britain,
Yeah.
well, all over the world.
Well, no plans to stop at the moment, certainly.
No, absolutely not.
Grand.
Gerald Dickens, thank you so much for joining us and for shedding new light as well on our favourite story, Christmas Carol.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been my absolute pleasure. Thank you, and a very Merry Christmas.
As a preface to the book Charles Dickens had written, I have endeavoured in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humour with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their homes pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, C.D., December 1843. And it is a story and a book that has haunted my life since I was a small kid, and Rhonda's as well. And we have several editions of the book in our library, and it continues to haunt our house in the most pleasant manner. But for any of you who have seen films of it but have never actually read the book, I would highly recommend that you do that, because it is full of so many wonderful descriptions of life in London in 1843, and it really brings the whole past to life in the most beautiful Technicolor fashion. It's descriptions of the foods and the colours and the smells. It's so evocative. I really, really say, read it. If you find it a bit wordy, stick with it. It's worth it. And after that, once you're used to the style, you won't find it wordy at all. You'll just find it an absolute delight. And so, on behalf of Rhonda and myself, I'd like to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas, and whatever winter festival that you celebrate, may it bring you joy and happiness. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.